And 3, 2, and 1.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Diana Famia. I'm the president of the Greater Washington, D.C. region of the National Organization of Italian American Women, and that includes Maryland and Virginia residents. I would like to welcome you here on our 440, which is celebrating the organization, NOIAW's 40th anniversary this year during this Italian Heritage Month. We hope you really enjoy our exploring the culinary roots, our culinary roots, and our speakers this evening. I did want to remind you that there are 2 more programs coming up. One is the Italian American Women Who Rule the World, okay, and Inspiration to Creation. I would like to introduce you to our moderator right this evening. Julia Bellotti has been a member of the NOIAW Council for several years. She actually was also involved in the NOIAW Cultural Exchange when she was a senior at American University. So she's been with us a while. And Julia is a government contractor in DC, where she helps people from different agencies and organizations share info with each other. Julia's Italian heritage is from the Piemonte area, and she's really interested in hearing what our speakers have to say. So I turn this to you, Julia.
Awesome. Thank you, Diana. And yes, I'm a huge foodie and I'm very excited for tonight's conversation. We have 2 wonderful speakers with us today, Domenica Marchetti and Amy Riolo. Domenica Marchetti is the author of 7 books on Italian home cooking. Her articles and recipes have been widely published, including Washington Post, Fine Cooking, Italy Magazine, and more. She leads culinary tours in Italy and is currently teaching a series of Italian cooking classes on Zoom. And NOIAW was fortunate enough we were able to honor her during our 2012 Wise Woman annual Epiphany celebration. And joining her is Amy Riolo. As an award-winning, best-selling author, chef, television personality, and Mediterranean diet advocate, Amy Riolo is known for sharing history, culture, and nutrition through global cuisine. She is also the author of 7 books covering both Mediterranean and Arab cuisine. Amy has her own olive oil, also leads culinary tours in Italy, but also in Greece and Morocco. And so we honored her during our 2015 Wise Woman Epiphany celebration. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Domenica, to start us off on exploring our Italian culinary roots.
Well, buonasera. Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. And thank you to NOIAW for asking me, because I get to talk about my favorite subject, which is Italian food. I'm going to focus on 2 regions this evening that I have, and I'm going to stand, I hope you don't mind, I have a connection to. So my family's roots are in the region of Abruzzo, and that is kind of, you know, if you think of Italy as a boot, Abruzzo is mid-calf, that's how I like to say it. And then I'll talk a little bit about a very different region with very different culinary traditions, and that is Liguria. But my mother was born and raised in the city of Chieti in Abruzzo, and so I spent my summers there on the Adriatic coast of Abruzzo when I was growing up. And I travel back to that region often, present times accepted, because I do lead culinary tours, and I also do a lot of research for articles and cooking classes and for books. So I try to get over there as often as I can. Like all Italian regions, the culinary traditions in Abruzzo reflect the territory, reflect the place, the location, and the terrain. And it's actually a very diverse culinary tradition in Abruzzo because the region itself is diverse. And it's actually known for its food. There are two sayings that are associated with Abruzzo. One is Abruzzo forte e gentile, strong and kind. And I believe that was a term coined by the journalist Primo Levi, maybe at the turn of the 20th century. And then the other term associated with Abruzzo is wherever you are in Italy, if you tell them you're from Abruzzo, you'll invariably hear, oh, in Abruzzo si mangia bene, so we eat well in Abruzzo, and that is absolutely the truth. So where is Abruzzo? If you land at Fiumicino in Rome, you're on the Mediterranean, essentially on the Mediterranean coast. So if you travel due east about an hour and a half, you hit the Apennine mountain range, and that is the beginning of Abruzzo. And so Abruzzo extends from the Apennines out to the Adriatic coast. And it is often associated or considered part of the south of Italy, but it's kind of the gateway to a lot of places. On the north, it's bordered by Le Marche, which is, getting into northern territory, Ancona and up there. And then to the west, we've got Rome and Lazio, so the region that encompasses Rome. And then to the south, Molise, which was once part of Abruzzo. It used to be Abruzzo Molise, Abruzzi, but now Molise is its own region. And but it's also very close to parts of little corners of Tuscany and Umbria, and of course Puglia, which borders Molise. So it has kind of a relationship culturally and culinarily to all of these other regions. When I was teaching, I was teaching a food workshop in Missouri last year, and I was trying to explain Abruzzo to the people of Missouri, and I was like, well, think of Missouri as the Abruzzo of the US, because Missouri is sort of a little south, a little west, a little Midwest. So that's kind of what Abruzzo is. And so it's a mountainous region. If you start with the Apennine Mountains, you've got the Gran Sasso d'Italia, beautiful mountain range, and the highest peak is the highest mountain in Italy outside of the Alps. So it's something like 7,000 plus feet. So it's quite high. And so with that, you have a lot of mountain cuisines, very hearty cuisine. For centuries, Abruzzo has relied on a pastoral economy. There were, a lot of raising of sheep. There were pastori and pecore, lots of, shepherds, and so there's this tradition of eating a lot of lamb and mutton, and also a lot of sheep's milk cheeses. So, this was a tradition that people in Abruzzo did for centuries. They raised sheep, and ever since the unification of Italy, the number of shepherds and sheep have been dwindling, but it is still very important to the Abruzzese economy. So if you were to head into the mountains of Abruzzo, you would go to the top of the Gran Sasso and you would eat arrosticini, which are these wonderful lamb skewers, very small lamb skewers that are put on these very narrow grills and grilled just simply with nothing but a little bit of salt, and they're very succulent and tender and just delicious. Other hearty foods of Abruzzo that you might even know about are, you think of spaghetti alla chitarra. So that's kind of a thick square cut noodle made with semolina. It's kind of a mix of 00 and semolina flour and a little bit of egg. And I have some props tonight. So I have my mother's chitarra. So this was given to her in the 1950s by her mother when she got married. And if you were to make spaghetti alla chitarra, you would take your sheet of pasta and you would put it on this box that is strung with wires. And it's kind of a thick sheet of pasta, and you would roll your little little mozzarella over it, and you would cut the sheet of pasta into these square cut noodles. And so that's a real typical dish in Abruzzo, and these hearty noodles are sauced with a hearty ragu that is, it's essentially a long simmering meat and tomato sauce, and typically made with whatever cuts of meat you happen to have hanging around, kind of less expensive cuts. And they're simmered a long time in tomato sauce, and they just make a wonderful, rich sauce for the spaghetti alla chitarra. You are probably familiar with potato gnocchi. That is another example of good traditional Abruzzese cuisine, also sauced with tomato, sometimes sauced with other, cheeses or butter and sage, but typically with a tomato sauce. And I have to say, Abruzzo has some of the best potatoes I've ever had. They're from Avezzano, which is kind of this plain in the middle of the region, and it's very high in minerals, and so for some reason it grows just incredible potatoes. Crespelle is one of my favorite dishes from Abruzzo, and that is crepes. So of course we associate crepes with the food of France, but it's also very traditional in Abruzzo, and it takes the place of pasta. So there's a particular dish called scrippelle in bus, which is dialect for crespelle in brodo. So you have your lovely thin lacy crepes, and you sprinkle pecorino cheese on them, you roll them up, and you simmer them in hot broth. And so if you think of yourself in the mountains of Abruzzo in January or February when it's very cold, there's nothing better than a bowl of these crespelle and a nice hot homemade meat broth. So let's see, porchetta is another traditional dish, and that is those of you who've been to Italy have probably had porchetta or visited a porchetta truck where you see the big pig on the spit, and it's been kind of deboned and stuffed and then re-rolled up and grilled slowly over the spit, and you get sliced porchetta and cracklins, and you eat it in a panino, and it's just probably the best street food ever. So polenta is another example of the mountain cuisine in Abruzzo. But Abruzzo's got many microclimates, so I want to quickly get into a little of those. So if you follow the mountains out toward the sea, you'll end up in the Novelli Plain, where you'll lots of chickpeas. The soil is really good for chickpeas and other legumes. There are black chickpeas in addition to the regular ones. Tiny lentils from Santo Stefano di Sessagno, beans. So there's a tradition of bean and chickpea soups with vegetables that you will see in the food of Abruzzo. Farro, that ancient grain that has become so popular. And that is something that may have migrated from south from the Garfagnana region, a part of Tuscany. That's the kind of northwestern corner of Tuscany, where you also see a lot of farro, but it's very popular in the cuisine of Abruzzo. Once you get out of the foothills and of the mountains, and you get toward the more gentle slopes as you head to the sea, you've got olives and olive groves and lots of vineyards, and winemaking. So Abruzzo actually has more than 10 varieties of olives, and it may even be double that. There's a lot of varieties of olives that grow in Abruzzo, and so there's some really wonderful olive oil that comes out of the region. And as for wine grapes, of course, there's Montepulciano d'Abruzzo, not to be confused with the Vino Nobile di Montepulciano from Tuscany, but the color is similar, so that's why it's referred to as Montepulciano d'Abruzzo. There's also Pecorino, which is an ancient grape that has come back in the last few decades, and a lovely rosé known as Cerasuolo, which is made from Montepulciano grapes, but it's kind of a dark rosé, and Cerasuolo refers to the cherry color of the wine. And then Trebbiano, which is kind of a workaday white wine from Abruzzo. As for the coast, I mentioned that the region does go out to the Adriatic coast, and there is an abundance of seafood from the Adriatic coast. fish, clams, mussels, calamari, moscardini, which are the tiny, tiny little cuttlefish that are fried whole and just kind of eaten like popcorn. They're so good. But lots of stews. Brodetto is the region's seafood stew, and you can, as you go up and down the coast, there out actually from Trieste all the way down the boot, there are just numerous variations on the brodetto, on the fish stew. And in Abruzzo, there's the brodetto from Pescara, brodetto from Vasto, and they're all slightly different in terms of the ingredients that they use, but it's mainly, fresh fish and seafood from the waters, and tomatoes and other ingredients. We in Abruzzo love our peperoncini, our little hot peppers. And so if you go to a restaurant in Abruzzo, you will see hot peppers in all incarnations. Sometimes they're fresh, sometimes they're dried, sometimes they're in oil, but we basically like to put peperoncino on everything. As for baking in Abruzzo, we all know pizzelle, right? That is actually a cookie, that waffle cookie that comes from Abruzzo. It's also known as ferratelle because it's traditionally made with cast iron, waffle iron. And so there's a tradition of cast iron, artwork and crafting in Abruzzo. And so you can find these old pizzella molds if you go out to Guardiagrele and some of these other towns in the region. It's a beautiful region. It's very green. So there's 3 national and regional parks within its borders. It's one of the greenest parts of Europe, and it's not especially tourist traveled, except the beaches in summer, which of course are very popular. But I love bringing people to Abruzzo because the food is very genuine, and many restaurants, especially out in the little towns in the country, cooked by families. The husband's front of the house, the wife is back of the house doing the cooking with maybe 1 or 2 helpers, and the food is just very genuine. I absolutely love it. I didn't expect, I'm going to move on to Liguria because I don't want to take too much more time, but I didn't expect to be giving tours in Liguria as well, but I got to know a woman who owns a little boutique tour company up in Genoa, and I had been there with my family and absolutely fell in love with the region. And it's very different from Abruzzo. So you think about the way that Italy fans out, and that northwestern coast, that rugged strip, that crescent, is Liguria, and it encompasses the Italian Riviera, San Remo, going from Monaco all the way down to the south to the coast, where it meets up with the coast of Tuscany. So you've got the Italian Riviera, you've got Genova, you've got Portofino, and some of those other lovely resort towns on the water, and you've got those beautiful color-splashed Cinque Terre fishing villages, where I don't think there are many fishermen anymore, but there are plenty of tourists. Although maybe not in the days of COVID, but hopefully things will be righting themselves sooner rather than later. Although Abruzzo and Liguria share, they are both coastal regions. Most regions in Italy, of course, are, and they also have mountains. The food couldn't be more different. Liguria has its own very peculiar food and taste and cooking, and it's really like nothing anywhere else in Italy. So we all know pesto genovese, the basil pesto that you eat with trofie, those little spiral pasta, or trenette, which are like linguine. And then of course we all know focaccia. Focaccia is also from Liguria. So those are probably Liguria's 2 most famous foods. But of course, because it's on the coast, there's a lot of fish also in Liguria. Stoccafisso, which is the Ligurian version of bacala, the salt-dried cod, is actually something that came over to Liguria from Scandinavia, some centuries back, but it took hold. And if you go into Genova, down to the little Caruggi, the little narrow historic streets by the port, you'll see all these fish shops and fisheries where you can get stoccafisso hanging in the window, or you can get fried calamari and fried shrimp and other fried seafood from the Mediterranean. Of course, we know about the basil from Liguria. It's actually grown in the hills above Genoa, and in order to be called basil DOP, so that's the real official basil used for pesto, it has to be grown on a certain hillside facing a certain way. You know, the breezes have to be going the right way. There are all these rules that govern how to make pesto genovese. Your pine nuts have to come from this nearby town over the border in Tuscany. The basil really can't be any bigger than your thumbnail, which is why they're able to make it in the mortar with the pestle, because the leaves are so very tender. If we make pesto with our mature kind of fibrous basil that we use here in the US, it's very hard to break that down with a mortar and pestle. But if you're using those tiny tender leaves, they're very fragrant, and the pesto is actually much more gentle than what we often get here or make here in the US. Other herbs are very important in Ligurian cuisine, herbs and tender greens, marjoram, baby chard, all of these foods that pair well with seafood. Ligurian cuisine is actually a very healthy cuisine. There's a lot done with vegetables. There's a wonderful dish called polpettone, which most of us think of as meatloaf, but in Liguria, it's actually kind of a baked dish with mashed potatoes and maybe artichokes or zucchini or green beans. You kind of mix that with eggs and you spread it into a pan. You cover it with breadcrumbs and bake it, and it's a really wonderful, hearty, but still healthful vegetarian dish. Torte salate, so salted torts like torta pasqualina, which is made with chard and greens and eggs and cheese and baked with a crust, and that is a famous Ligurian Easter dish. And if you go throughout the towns of Liguria, you will see these shops that sell, prepared torte salate, and you can get them by the slice or you can get them whole. Because the region is so rugged and there's so little space in Liguria, unlike the vast expanses in Abruzzo, you don't see a lot of big, you don't see beef, you don't see a lot of pork, you see small game like rabbits and then chicken. And of course, nuts are something that grows in abundance in Liguria. Pine nuts not only, but also walnuts and chestnuts. As you get out of the coast and into the interior of the region, you will see these chestnut groves, and chestnuts are, one of Liguria's, cucina povera ingredient, but they are smoked and dried and ground into flour, and they are turned into pasta, they are turned into cakes and cookies. So it's, there's a really peculiar cuisine in the foothills of the Alps and outside of Liguria, and it's called cucina bianca because it's in the forests where these chestnut groves are, but there's not a lot of sunlight that gets through, so all of the food is kind of white. There are, cabbages, chestnuts, white cheeses, just a food that's got very gentle in nature and gentle in flavor. The ravioli are stuffed with, ricotta or a local cheese called prescinseur, which is kind of a sour cheese, and then chopped nuts. You see a lot of walnuts and nuts in the food of Liguria. For sweets, Liguria doesn't have a huge tradition of sweets. There are pasticcerias, of course, but they're mostly rustic. It does have some great cookies. If you get out of Genova and you kind of drive around into the hills, there are all sorts of little towns that dot the hillsides that have their own special little cookies. There's a cookie called canestrelli. They're sort of flower shaped and they're very buttery. And, they're kind of associated with one particular town outside of Genoa, and they date back to like the 15th century. So there's all of these little traditions in the towns outside of Genoa and up into the hills. Citrus, it grows beautifully in Liguria, And you will see not only oranges and lemons, but also a very bitter orange known as chinotto. If you're familiar with the drink chinotto, it's kind of based on the bitter flavor of this citrus by the same name. Orange blossoms are used as a flavor agent in baking and in confections. And then roses. So I've got a little bottle of rose syrup here that I bought at a confectionery in Liguria. And so round about the end of May or the beginning of June, there are rose growers who will harvest all of their beautiful roses and strip all the petals off, and they turn these beautiful rose petals into syrups. And I've got a little bit of rose jam here, rose jelly, and when kids are young in Liguria, one of their favorite drinks is, carbonated water with rose syrup in it. It's got a very distinct flavor, but it's associated with, for many people in Liguria, with their childhoods. You don't see a lot of tomatoes in Liguria. Tomatoes, of course, are mostly associated with the South. So that's why you have, your spaghetti or your trenette are dressed with pesto, whether it's basil pesto or walnut and ricotta pesto. You just don't see a lot of those assertive Southern flavors. So it's a really different cuisine. And if you're not that familiar with it, I highly recommend you give it, just kind of find a way to, there's some cookbooks, there's always the potential of travel at some point. And it's just really an extraordinary region in terms of, because it's so small, and yet the cuisine is really just like nothing I've ever had. So I've really fallen in love with it. And so I have to say those two regions are probably, or without a doubt, my favorite for learning and exploring and recipe development. I absolutely love and that's the beauty of Italy. It's, one region is different from the next, and that's why we keep going back, isn't it?
It definitely is. Thank you so much, Domenica. That was a wonderful intro to those two regions. And I'm excited to hear what Amy has to say next. If anyone has questions for Domenica, please submit them either through the chat or the Q&A. We will have plenty of time to answer them afterwards. So go ahead, submit your questions now while they're fresh in your mind. And I will turn it over to Amy to tell us a little bit about some other regions in Italy.
Hi, Julia. Hi, Domenica. Thank you all so much for having me here today. And thank you to everybody who's watching. I just unmuted myself. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Okay. So Domenica, I realized it's been 4 years since we last talked about this together at the Library of Congress for Italian Food in the World Week. So it's long overdue. I can't believe that it's been 4 years, but it's great to be talking about this with you again. And it's amazing how our lives have kind of expanded since then, and how we've been doing so many additional great things in Italy since that time. So, one of the things I kind of wanted to underline with everybody that I think is unique about the work that Domenica and I do, but also that maybe other Italian American women do as well, as, we have connections to our family in Italy. We have very close connections to our roots, but as well, we also work in Italy now and in other regions, and have formed laid down more modern roots, or made a mark that is also our own. So we're kind of taking that forward. And I really love that aspect of my work, whether it's culinarily or just personally. It gives me so much reward, because that's one of the nice things about, modern times, is that we can kind of, go back, retrace the footsteps of our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, or our ancestors, but also, form some new traditions of our own. So I love talking about that. And also, Abruzzo is also very close to my heart. But my family's all originally from Calabria. My father's side was from Crotone. My mother's side was from, my mother's father's side was from Reggio Calabria. So all within Calabria. And as we talk about, the food of that region, first of all, I would like to say, even though there are so many different microclimates within Italy and so many different regions and different influences, that actually, if you would like to ever look at the history of Italian food, you could look up a video that Domenica and I did for the Library of Congress. It's on my YouTube channel, and you can kind of see historically how all of the regions and their cuisines evolved, and a lot of the things that we don't have time to get into tonight. But there's a lot of overlap, you know, and a lot of differences. So one of the things I think that makes Calabria unique and makes many Italian regions unique are the people who were there indigenously. So even before we start talking about foreign influences, Abruzzo and what is now Abruzzo and what is now Calabria and what is now other regions had some indigenous people. So in Calabria, the main two groups that were there from the beginning were the Enotri and the Itali. The Enotri were the wine cultivators, and they were named by the Greeks in the 6th century before the Common Era. So because of the wine that was already growing in Calabria at that time, and the Greeks grew wine in Calabria. So that's interesting to know. And the second one, the Itali, which is where we get the modern word Italy and Italian from, was from this group. In Abruzzo, there were the Samnites. So nowadays, like when I do culinary tours in Italy and when we go to the different areas, when we go to Abruzzo, we make sure to talk about these ancient Samnite ruins, because the Samnites were before the Romans. And so we actually create these meals that were authentic in those times. And that gives people a taste to kind of how different it was, but also how similar it is to nowadays too, and how advanced these ancient cultures were. And they kind of overlapped. So when the Samnites were in Abruzzo, the Itali and the Enotri were in Calabria. But as we go into Calabria, there is definitely that what was always local and kind of the love of the land and the love of the sea, but also what was being brought in and what was foreign. Calabria was part of Magna Graecia many, many centuries before the Common Era. So because of that, there is a very strong Greek flavor and an overlap between Greece and Italy, because Magna Graecia meant Greater Greece. So when the Greeks came and populated us, they didn't look at us like a faraway land that they were just going to kind of exploit. They were actually going to live there and transform it into something better for them. So we have a ton of synergy with Greeks in terms of like wild oregano and the honeys and the local herbs, the goats, the different, you know, races of sheep and grapes and things like that that actually came from Greece, but that have been there for many, many centuries before the Common Era. So that's a very important thing. Oh, and by the way, my little picture, my backdrop that I have, this was from my great-grandfather's house in the Centro Storico of Crotone in Calabria. So Crotone is on the Ionian Sea, and the Greek philosopher Pythagoras, who was originally from Samos, which is the island, the Greek island closest to Turkey, left Greece, and after a long time spent in the Mediterranean, came to Crotone, which was known as Croton. It was spelled with a K, K-R-O-T-O-N, in ancient times. And he formed a school for intellectuals. And they didn't only study math, but also philosophy, nutrition, music, and poetry. And his wife was actually also a very famous mathematician at the time. And Pythagoras was vegetarian because he believed that we reincarnated, and he believed that we reincarnated as animals. So he didn't want to eat anything that we could potentially be reincarnated as. And he even outlawed fava beans, which are now very popular in Calabria, because their makeup was very similar to that, ethos of the plant world, but kind of had similarities to, you know, animals. And so he didn't want anybody to eat fava beans. So we can even look back to the times of Pythagoras and the philosophers and see what they were doing and see how this plays a role now in modern day Calabria. Another thing that's really cool about Calabria is this idea. It's very, when you go and you wander around these back alleys, like where my great-grandfather's house is and things like that, there's almost a North African Arab kind of a feel to it. It's very different from the Centro Storici in other places in Italy. And a little bit of mystery and a little bit of intrigue, and, you know, to me, just beautiful and mesmerizing. But there's this culture of, you know, the more you eat, the more you offer, the more food you offer, the more you love the person. So food can be, you know, seen as a sign of respect, a sign of hospitality. And it's not considered wasteful to offer a guest a lot of food. The more you can offer them, the better. So, for example, it's very common for people to make 30 to 40 courses. And I'm not talking, you know, celebrity chefs or people with big, huge brigades from the kitchen. I'm talking like a couple housewives together making 30 to 40 courses, either to welcome, you know, someone who's left the country back home, a family member, a family wedding, something like that. Many, many courses. And we have the idea of appetizers or antipasti before meals, especially like a Sunday meal or a ceremony, or again, honoring somebody that's huge, almost like the Greek mitzedes or the Arab mezze. So many appetizers. I've counted up to 40, for example, at family affairs when I was going back home, or our family was going back home, or if it was a holiday. So the amount of different types of food and the amount of preparation and the amount of DIY is, you know, kind of, I think it's unparalleled. It's very, very broad. And people are very proud of doing their own things. Calabrians, they say they always, no matter where they live in the world, they like to have one hand in the dirt. And that's true. We like to grow our own things. So I remember when my family first came to visit here in the United States, the ones that were still there, when they came, they all brought things that they had made, you know, pecorino that was from their farm, things that were in oil and in vinegar that they had done. Everything was homemade with the exception of silver and gold from jewelry that they had brought. And when they left, I was a young girl at the time, but I remember going to give them something back and not having that same homemade thing to offer them back. And I just thought about that, and it, you know, it made me a little bit sad, because I said, there's nothing I can buy in a store that is as wonderful as they make and they give us back to us. So that's a little bit unique about Calabria. But also in Abruzzo, from working there and leading tours there, one of the similar things that I can see is how nostalgic people are. People in Abruzzo are very, very nostalgic about their food. And when they, you know, go to serve you something, they will often tell a long story about where the plate came from, where the picture behind you came from, what it means to them, how they're tied to it. Very genuine, very close to the land, 0 food miles, sometimes even 0 food feet, and also the peperoncino. So Calabria and Abruzzo have definitely a lot in common. When I think about my favorite food memories, you know, it's hard to point down one because food is the center of all the memories there. But in Calabria, my favorite ones have to do with family, of course. So I'll start with the cavatelli, which are the traditional little cave-shaped pasta that are traditional in Calabria. My zia Santina would make them, and she would have this over in the farmhouse. She would have these beautiful cavatelli with a homemade sugo. And, you know, when you sat down with the whole family and ate these, that she had all, you know, personally shaped, and hers were perfect. She was really known for making amazing ones. There are a few things that are better. And to me, no pasta, even though I've been blessed to taste phenomenal ones. I think I do a pretty good job of making them myself, but hers are the tops, and they'll always be that standard, you know, gold standard for me of what cavatelli and pasta can taste like. In Calabria, we also have lagane, which come from the word lagana, which were a pasta that were there since the 5th century before the Common Era. If you Google my name and history of pasta, there'll be recipes, and there'll also be information more about the lagane. But the lagane come from the Greek word laganon, which laganon is still eaten in Greece. It's a bread that's eaten on Clean Monday. So the Monday, we call it Holy Monday, before Easter. This is a type of bread that they make. For some reason, when it came to Italy, and especially to what is now Calabria, and they also serve it in Basilicata, that word got fused with pasta. They were using barley to make the bread. They were then using barley to make the pasta, and we call them lagane. And it's very traditional to make lagane con ceci, or lagane with chickpeas, especially for March 19th, which is St. Joseph's Day. So you can have it obviously any time, but it's traditional during that time. There are many indigenous varieties of grapes. Like the Calabria is most known for the Ciro, which is made from the Galliopo grape in Ciro Marina. And that was one of the wines that was taken back to Greece and given to the Olympic champions in ancient times. But there's also the Malioco and many other indigenous grapes that are constantly being found and you know, continued to be. They've done a lot of research, especially with the Librandi winery, who I work closely with, has reintroduced a lot of these indigenous grapes. And so I'm very proud of them. And this is also something that, as Domenica was speaking about the cultivars of olives, you know, the olive, the the grapes and also the grains are three things that are, essential to the Mediterranean diet, essentially to Italy and our history. And these are three things that fortunately a lot of producers are bringing back now and are investing a lot of money in making sure that we have the indigenous ones. So I actually private label my own olive oil, and it comes from Abruzzo, from a place where we lead our culinary tours in the province of Chieti, where Domenica's family is from. And it's a mix of three cultivars, the Gentili di Chieti, which means soft or kind from Chieti, and the Intosso, and the Lecchino, which the Lecchino variety can be found in other areas in Italy. But it's a blend of these three. So this just gives you an example of some of these local flavors and how they're bringing them back. And it warms my heart. You can go to a little hole-in-the-wall pizzeria in Abruzzo, and the gentleman, behind the oven, it's like 500 years old, will be, using a combination of flours that he has hand ground, and they might be like 8 different ancient grains. And so even housewives, I find in Abruzzo and in Molise, take a lot of pleasure in using these ancient grains that are being brought back. They're better for our health. They help to promote biodiversity. They're good on the environment. And it's part of our culinary tradition. So it's really nice for them to, be able to keep up with those. And I'm very, very happy with that. Another favorite food memory that I have, going back to Calabria again, is going to the marina with my cousin Angela. We usually go to the marina, get fresh seafood, and then go back to her place and cook. Or we'll go with my father's cousins, Francesco and his wife Pina, and we'll just cook large meals together of different things, of whatever's in season, of whatever they have, whatever they've preserved from before, and kind of use a combination. I really like finding out those secret things of how they preserve things. Like in Calabria, for example, one of the most traditional recipes is pipe patate, which in dialect means peppers and potatoes. So very simple dish, and you can try to remake it in the States, and I do it often, but it's difficult because we don't have the potatoes from Sila. You can use a really good quality Idaho potato if you want to change it. And we don't have the special varieties of peppers also. The olive oil is different. And what my cousins do is they cure their peppers in salt and layers of salt. So they use those really good quality peppers, usually which they've grown. They soak them in olive oil, or other ones preserve them in sea salt. And then they use those to make their dish of the peppers and potatoes. And then they serve that in between bread, which is homemade with a natural starter bread. And the flavors of that, it's a true testament to how something can be so simple, but also really good for you and really satisfying and hard to redo if you don't have different quality ingredients. Most people, when they think of Calabria, they think of the pork products like the Induja and the soppressata and the different types of sausages and things like that. Also now, one of the new ancient things that they're bringing back is some types of salumi made from seafood, which they used to do in the ancient times and they got away from. But some of my friends in the town of Vinci in Tuscany, Chef Samuele and Fabio, are doing a lot of things to reinvent this type of salumi using seafood, which I'm a huge proponent of because it's delicious, it's healthy for us, and most people can eat seafood. So in Crotone in Calabria, we have a wonderful restaurant called Ercole, or Hercules' place, that's right on the Ionian, and they have a lot of wonderful seafood dishes. And also in Abruzzo, one of the things that we do with our tour groups is we take them on the trabocco, and we have them, which is a traditional vessel that they would fish from. It doesn't leave the shore. It's just this wooden vessel that's now protected by UNESCO, and they fish right from it with these nets. And whatever they bring in, that's what they have. So they recreate these seafood meals on the trabocco. We normally take our groups there, and it's really wonderful because not only is it delicious and healthy for you, but you see a lot of the traditional recipes being maintained, and also some new, really more innovative ones, kind of like, carpaccios and things like that. Another thing that we were thinking about discussing before was some of our our own personal favorite traditions. So mine, whenever I talk about, if I had to narrow down one food tradition, of course there are many, and I love all of the traditions in Italy, but my main thing that I would have to pick would be bread. bread just has such a sacred place, you know, in my heart and in my life, in my writing and in my world. So, and I got that from my grandmother. So my grandmother would always make, my Nonna Angela would always make special breads for Easter or Christmas, you know, Saints' Days, things like that. And some of our family in Calabria also had forni, or more rustic bakeries, not the pasticcerie, but the one where they make the bread. And they would always make certain ones for Saint days that are, many of them are unique to Calabria. So for me, when I bake bread, when I get my hands in the dough, it's therapeutic, but I feel like I'm connected to my ancestors and I'm bringing something forward. And I love to pass those traditions down to my little younger brother. He's a wonderful dough and a really good baker, and it really warms my heart to think that these recipes that my grandmother taught me will get passed on. And when social media first came out, one of my best memories was I went onto Facebook and my cousin in Crotone, Angela, was making cuzzupe di Pasqua, which are very traditional little breads, you know, stuffed with eggs for Easter time. And we had made them at the same time without talking to each other. This was before WhatsApp and, you know, different methods of speaking on the phone. We hadn't talked to each other. We didn't know, but we both just intuitively made these on the same day and posted them at the same time. And so to think that our families have been separated, you know, by the Atlantic for 100 years. And here we have this recipe for Easter that we both are still making just as a matter of habit without talking to anybody, without needing to do it. It really brought me a lot of joy. And I think that's the power of food, you know, as Italian Americans or as from people from any culture, the power of food to tie us to our families, to tie us to our, you know, larger community, to the world and to ourselves. So that's very, very important to me. And I think, and just in the sake of time, I'll end there. And I could continue longer if needed, but I know we have some questions and I don't want to overstay my welcome.
All right. Thank you, Amy. I loved hearing about all your stories there. So we'll definitely get to some. We've had several questions come in, and please continue to ask them. So I'll go start making sure that we can get ahead on these. So first, a couple of questions for Domenica. Have you ever heard of Il Paese dei Cuochi, Villa della Santa Maria, and the patron saint of chefs, Francesco Caracciolo? There's a famous cooking / hotelier school there in the Val di Sangro, provincia di Chieti.
Yes, I have heard of it. I have yet to visit it, I'm sorry to say, but it is indeed very famous. And in fact, I believe that cooking school has turned out some of, I mean, not only famous chefs in Italy, but chefs who've gone on, you know, to all over the world. So yes, I absolutely have heard of it, and I do hope to get there one day. Abruzzo, you know, for all of its rustic food, it does have that that tradition and history of high cuisine, alta cucina. And in fact, there's a Michelin-starred chef, Nico Romito, I think is his name. I may be getting it wrong, but yeah, you know who I'm talking about, Amy, right? And he's, you know, he's sort of taken traditional Abruzzese food and reinvented it, very modern, very sort of high end, very whimsical. And so of course, yeah, so it's not just kind of rustic, you know, cucina casareccia. We do have that tradition of alta cucina dating, you know, I don't know how long Villa Santa Maria has been around, but it's, I've got to think at least a century or so. So yeah.
That's awesome. Very cool. We've got another question here. Roberta writes, my family came from Tuscany. They have an identical dish to crispelles. They call it schiaffonioni. Have you heard it called that?
No, I haven't heard it called that, but I do, I have had Tuscan dishes with crepes. So crispelle alla fiorentina, which is with, I think with cheese and spinach. So yeah, there are other parts of Italy that also have crepe dishes. Another wonderful crepe dish from Abruzzo is timballo di crispelle. So timballo is actually, used to be used interchangeably with lasagna. Lasagna used to refer to the sheets of pasta And if you look at old Italian cookbooks, you'll see recipes for timballo di lasagna. So it was a timballo, you know, baked dish made with lasagna sheets. Well, in Abruzzo, we make it with crepes. So instead of layering pasta sheets, you layer crepes with sauce and cheese, and also these teeny tiny pallotte, tiny meatballs. And if you've never had a crepe lasagna or timballo before, it is ethereal. The crepes are so light. They're lighter than thin pasta sheets, and I absolutely love them. And I wrote about, I think I wrote a recipe for the Washington Post some years ago. So if you Google my name and Washington Post will come up with that recipe. I also wanted to show, I forgot to do this earlier. This is my pasta book that came out a few years ago, but this is the spaghetti alla chitarra, macaroni alla chitarra, with the Abruzzese ragu, and then the teeny tiny little veal meatballs that are typically, like, especially if it's Sunday or a celebratory occasion, people will make those teeny tiny meatballs. And I mean, it can take like over an hour to go through a pound of veal because they are literally chickpea sized. They're tiny. So anyway, that's kind of going beyond crepes, but yeah.
It sort of flows into our next question here. We have someone who missed the very beginning and asked if that's a chitarra on your counter, that they have one from their parents to make macaroni.
Yes, so this is my mom's chitarra, and you can find chitarras all over Abruzzo at the mercati, at the little markets that set up in the piazzas of towns weekly or sometimes even daily. But I'll tell you a little secret. So you know a good chitarra by the number of nails used to string the instrument. If it's got just like 6 or 7 nails, it's not high quality. This one's really quite old, and you can see there's a lot of nails. And you can tighten the strings by turning these. It's got 2 sides. This is kind of a wider cut. I don't know if you can see that, it's kind of hard. And then a thinner cut. And I call the wider ones tonnarelli. I don't know if that's accurate. I know in Lazio, where Rome is, right over the border, they also make tonnarelli, but they're sort of like chitarra. So, you know, as Amy said, these foods cross borders. I mean, there's a lot of differences, but there's also a lot of similarities, symbiotic relationships. In Abruzzo, there's the tradition of the transumanza, and that is the driving of the sheep down to Puglia in winter and then back up to the mountains of Abruzzo in summer. So there's a bakery that we take our tour guests to where the baker insists on using almonds from Puglia because he sources, you know, he's got his source who he knows is the best. And so if he's making baked goods with almonds, he is going to use these almonds that he sources from Puglia. So there's a lot of, these, and then like cookies as well. I mentioned cookies before. There are so many cookies in Italy that are similar or alike, but they just have different names depending on the region that you're in. And I think there's some in Calabria, Amy, that are similar to the Abruzzese, like the celleri pieni, which means stuffed birds.
Yes.
And a flaky, delicate dough stuffed in Abruzzo. We stuff it with scrucchiata, which is fresh grape jam, and then chocolate and nuts, and that's a Christmas treat. But so there's something similar in Calabria, isn't there?
Yeah, they're the petrali, and in Sicily they call them the cucinati. I think they're a little more known as that, and everybody has their own recipe. You know, my grandmother's recipe is figs and dates and cherries and every spice you had in your cupboard, and about 50 different ingredients, but they're wonderful. And we did the celleri pieni with the class, and once you start doing them, it reminds you that it's the same. And but what you inspired me about, and I can't believe I forgot to mention it, Domenica, is the pallotte. And how delicious they are, because first of all, we could talk about meatballs or fake meatballs through all the Italian regions. That would make a great conversation on its own. But sometimes I like to do I like to just do it thinking about regions, and I say, okay, like I'll do in Calabria, the meatballs are croquette shaped, and they call them bracciole a lot of times. fry them. And then the palotte I fell in love with in Abruzzo because growing up, I never liked meat. So I would always not want the meatballs. And I was like, here's finally a meatball, I can warm up to. And just the idea of the egg and the cheese in them, and they're wonderful.
Oh yeah, the palotte cacio e uova, that's different. Yeah, so that's a meatless meatball that's made with bread, bread and egg and lots of pecorino cheese, and those are fried and then simmered in sauce. And in fact, we do a couple of cooking classes, and in one of the classes we actually make the palotte, and they are so good. And they're I think they're something that people traditionally served during Lent, but of course you can make them anytime, and they're wonderful, so flavorful. You don't miss the meat at all. Yeah,
definitely.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you guys went into a couple different segues there. You ended up answering another question that we had about Christmas cookies, and are they popular in other parts of the country besides Abruzzo? So I'm glad we hit on that. I don't know if Amy, you had other regions that do the Christmas cookies that you wanted to mention.
Sure, but I think that a lot of times the cookies aren't only for Christmas, and it's not, and the other way around. Like the Christmas desserts aren't limited to cookies. So like in Calabria, there's the pita chiusa, which is like a pastry type dough that's almost rolled into rosettes, filled with nuts and raisins and things like that. If you looked at it, almost looks like the Greek deplis. There are also types of donuts that are fried. And of course we know about the panettone and the pandoro. And so Christmas cookies, although for Italian Americans, they really exploded here, because that's one thing that we could take and make, and it married well with the American tradition of Christmas cookies. But there's also, that's just the entryway into what is in Calabria. So another one that we have are the biscotti di Regina, or the sesame covered cookies. It's very, very typical. There's something else we share those with Sicily, and also the tettu, which are like a chocolate cookie with cloves that are similar to mostaccioli in other regions. But they also make those for the All Saints Day, which is going to be coming up on November 2nd. So there are a lot of cookies, but there are many more Christmas desserts other than cookies, and sweet treats and breads and things like that are saved until Christmas.
Right. I wanted just to mention that I actually am teaching an Italian Christmas cookie class in December. So if people are interested in that, I think I have a few spots left. But you can find out more about it on my website. And but yes, I actually did grow up in New Jersey with my mother and my sister, and every Christmas we would just bake many different kinds of cookies, and we would buy our panettone. Now people are making panettone, and I actually wrote about that a couple of years ago for the Chicago Tribune. Even home bakers are making panettone, but I still say that some of these lavish, festival breads, you can't beat the ones from the bakeries, from the pasticceria.
Yeah, awesome. We have a great question here for both of you. Have you found a similar curiosity towards Italian American cuisine from Italians while on your respective culinary tours in Italy?
That is a good question. Overall, I would have to say not so much. They kind of view it with a little bit of look askance at it. Am I? Do you get that same impression, Amy? Or they don't really understand it?
Yeah. So all of my my Italian friends, family, colleagues, whatever, they really love American food. Like the idea of American food as a treat, like pulled pork, or a big steak, the right hamburger, something that's like they associate with America. They're really, happy to try that and want to know about that and talk about that. Muffins, brownies, cheesecake, you name it. But when it gets to like Italian American food, it gets very confusing, because they're still in that process of saying, but that's not right, that's not authentic, that's not this. Sometimes, if you can really present it as this, like I do that sometimes with like the cookies or different things that I make. I say, look, I'm not trying to do this, but this is what we grew up with, and try it, you might like it. And I get
Right,
some good
yeah.
responses there. But there's no big sweep of, I did hear that there, a couple years ago, there was like an Italian-American style red and white tablecloth restaurant that opened in Rome that people
I
went
did
to.
hear about that too. I
Yes,
didn't know,
yes.
I thought I heard of one in Milano or something. So, but yeah, the trend right now in Italy is for American sweets, especially. I see a lot of Italian food bloggers posting about banana bread these days and brownies. And I was just contacted by one of the cooking magazines in Italy they wanted me to talk about the history of brownies and the evolution of brownies for a feature that they're doing. And so yeah, they're very into American food, but maybe not so much Italian American food. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Cool, very interesting. We've got a couple more questions. We're very enthused about the cookie train here. So we've got one question. What was the name of the cookie, Domenica, that you mentioned earlier that begins with a C?
Oh, canestrelli from Liguria. Yeah, they're just a very basic butter cookie, but they're kind of thick cut, and then you can dust them with powdered sugar, or you can dip them in melted chocolate. There's several different kinds of icing, but it's very hard to make them properly. And I've been working on a recipe for a long time, and I'm still tweaking it. But it should kind of melt in your mouth, and so there are different ways to achieve that. But there is like an official ingredient list that if you're making true canestrelli that you have to follow, and it's basically butter, flour, eggs, and sugar. So no artificial leavening, and you can use a little flavoring, either lemon zest or rum or vanilla. But so achieving that texture with just those few ingredients is not easy, and I'm working on it.
All right, awesome. And then we have a question here. There's someone's husband's favorite Christmas pastry is sfogliatelli. I don't know if Amy, you've heard of that or want to take the lead on that one?
Yeah, the sfogliatelli are traditional Neapolitan dessert that are absolutely wonderful. The best ones I've ever had in the United States are at the Florentine Bakery in Utica, New York. They were really, really good. But the sfoglia comes from the sheet, the really thin pastry sheets. And the ones that are done really well are so thin that when you just bite into them, they're like flaky and delicious, and they can be filled with cream or ricotta or a kind of ricotta cream. And they're not limited to Christmas. In Napoli, they eat them. They can have them every day with coffee, especially for breakfast and coffee. It's very traditional. Here in DC at the Italian Embassy, when it's open, the Marra family, the women who run the cafe, always have sfogliatelli on hand. So definitely a good thing. But it's one of those things that's when it's not made properly, it can be really bad. They can be heavy, they can be thick, they can be improperly made. But when they're made properly, they're heaven in a bite. Just wonderful.
They are.
That's wonderful. So it is 7:32 here, and I don't see any other questions that have come in. But I do want to give a huge thank you to both Amy and Domenica. This was a lovely discussion. I personally learned a lot more about history of food, and definitely in those regions that I didn't know before. We had someone who asked about the Library of Congress discussion. I did paste that link to the YouTube video in the chat there. So if you're interested in listening to both Amy and Domenica discuss the history of Italian food more in a much in a longer format, you can definitely check that out there. We do have thanks from many people about this panel today, so doubling my thanks to you both. And I do want to remind everyone that there is going to be the third out of 4 for 40 for NOIAW's 40th anniversary is going to be Tuesday, October 20th, all about women in politics, Italian American women who rule the world. So I hope you will join us for that discussion as well. It looks to be wonderful. So thank you all for attending this evening, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening and a good long weekend upcoming.
Thank you all.
Thanks for having us.